Okay. I will wait one more second. How's that? Still a little bit of feedback coming out, huh? Yeah. All right. We're getting better. We're sounding pretty good. Genesis chapter 29. Slowly but surely, we're getting through, getting somewhere. Eventually, we will finish this book. We're taking our time. Genesis chapter 29, and we are still in the life of Jacob, which, Jacob, there's a lot of lessons in his life. If we're going to say something good about Jacob, let's say he teaches us a lot of lessons. Now, that doesn't mean that they're good lessons, because most of the time, they are not. My iPad keeps turning off. I don't know how to fix it. So, that's fun. Let's try that, see if that does anything. Okay, Genesis 29. So Jacob, he teaches us a lot of bad examples of what not to do. So we looked at in chapter 24, was it? Chapter 24, where there was a servant sent for, oh man, my iPad's not working. There was a servant sent to find a wife for Isaac. Is his name Eliezer? I think it was. And he sent out to go find this wife, and we talked about in Genesis 24, godly steps to take when you're looking for a spouse, right? And there was some great examples. So Genesis 24 was the good example. Now we're going to look at Genesis 29, and this is the bad example. This is what not to do. So there are going to be a lot of lessons here, though. It's not just for finding a spouse. There's a lot of things here, a lot of what not to do's with Jacob. So we'll get into it, and we'll see. There's plenty of lessons for everybody here. If you're married, there's lessons for you. If you're not, there's lessons for you. Let's pray, though. Lord, thank you for this time in your word. Thank you that we can meet with you. We can just come together in this place to have this time in your word, God, and know that you are here, that we can know that you speak to us. We can know that there's power in this, that we're not just doing some coaching session or something that comes from man, but this comes from you. This is your word to us. And so we trust in those promises, Lord, and we desire more of you. We desire more of your wisdom for our lives. We desire these lessons that are taught through the characters in the Bible about how to live the right way, how to avoid things that we could fall into. And so, Lord, I pray that as we look at the example of Jacob, that we would learn for our own lives so we don't have to fall into the same things. So help us, Lord, grow us, speak to us, and convict and encourage, Lord. May your word go forth in power in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. If you need me to change microphones, that's not a problem for me. It's fine with me. Do you want me to change it? Better now than later.
Is it distracting to you right now?
It is for me.
What if you didn't have one at all? See what happens.
The only thing about that is we're online. And then
Oh, okay.
let me just switch it over. Yeah, we'll figure it out. Okay. All right. How's that? Beautiful. Here we go. Take two. Cancel the live stream. Start up. No, okay. We'll pretend like nothing happened up until this point. Genesis chapter 29. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, here we go. So let me read the first the first 6 verses, and we'll start talking about it. It says this: So Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east, and he looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in the place on the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, My brethren, where are you from? And they said, We are from Haran. And he said to them, Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And so he said to them, Is he well? And they said, He is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. So Jacob, the last time we saw him, remember that he left his parents' place where he was with them. He had his fight with his brother. The second time he manipulated him. He stole the birthright and the blessing and manipulated his dad by putting on the sheepskin. And you guys remember the story. So he went through his manipulations to get his own way, but then once he had his way, he realized, oh, this is a problem. Now everyone hates me, right? Now all my relationships are broken, and I can't be around these people that I've manipulated and stolen from. And so my iPad has problems today, so if not, we're just going to not use notes. Let's see how that goes. So he's left that place, and his parents told him, go and find a wife from her parents, where they're from Laban. And so he's on his way. And then in the middle of the story, we saw that he stopped and he had this experience with God where he saw the ladder come down. Remember Jacob's ladder, heaven opens, the angels ascending and descending, and he has this moment with God where he realizes, I am in the presence of God. Heaven is open for me. There's a connection between heaven and earth, right? And we talked about that. We talked about Jesus being that ladder for us. But Jacob had this experience with God where now God has passed the blessing specifically to him. It's no longer just a blessing for Abraham and for Isaac. It's now from God, not just from his dad, but from God directly to him, and he's received that blessing, right? And so, incredible moment, heaven opens, he hears from God, he receives the blessings, and then right after that, remember what he went on to do? He goes on to try to manipulate God. He goes on from there, and he says, well, if you'll be my God, and if you'll bring me back, then I will let you be my God, and I will give you 10% of all that you've given me. Like, really? You're going to manipulate God at this point after he's promised you all these things? So you see that Jacob, he's having spiritual growth. He's having these experiences with God, but he's also not fully getting it. He doesn't really understand God completely, and he doesn't understand the character of God or what God desires from him. He thinks that if he gives 10%, then he's bought God's blessing and God has to do good to him. That's not it at all, right? The giving comes out of what God has done for me, not out of what I can manipulate him into doing for me, right? And so that's what we're coming off of in the last story. And now, all of a sudden, we talked about how it was a 16-day journey for him to go from where his parents were to where Laban is. And now he has this moment where he meets with God, and then the next verse, now he's there. He just shows up. And so it doesn't tell us about the rest of his journey, but he made it. And I think that in itself is a sign of the grace of God, right? It's the grace of God that he arrives there at all. He made his way. He found his way there. He shows up. And as he shows up, he comes to this place at the well, maybe the same place where the servant had come to find a wife for Isaac, because it's the well that Laban's daughter is going to. And so as he shows up there, it says the flocks would come together, and they would open up there's this big stone that would stay on the mouth of the well. and that stone would be rolled away, and then they would let all the flocks drink, and then they would put it back on. And so as Jacob rolls up, he sees the stone on the top, and he can't get water, and so he's like, hey guys, what's going on here? And he's looking for water. But he rolls up to this place, and he says, do you guys know Laban, right? And so they answer and say, we know him, verse 5. Do you know Laban? And they say, we know him. Everybody knows Laban. Laban is a guy that probably is well known. And probably they don't want to say anything about him because he's probably not very well liked. So they say they know him, and then he's like, can I get a little information? So they say, is he well? Jacob says to him. And they say, he is well. And then they say, look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. So remember when the servant came, he was looking for the person that would marry his master. He was on a mission for his master to find the wife, right? And so as he showed up, he was in prayer, he was prepared, he was looking, but he was waiting on the Lord. And so in this same place, probably Jacob has heard this story his whole life. Probably Jacob has heard about Rebekah and how, the servant came and she met the servant there, and how God showed up and prepared the way and all these things. Jacob has probably heard this story over and over since he was a kid, and now he's showing up at the well, and Rachel is about to get there, and he's like, oh man, this is the thing movies are made of, right? Because that's what he knows. This is the love story that he knows. And so she happens to be coming right as Jacob gets there. So let's go on and read verses 7 and 8 and see what happens. It says in verse 7, it says, then he said, look, it is still high day. It is not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go and feed them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together, and they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and then we will water the sheep. So Jacob hears that she's coming. He is seeing opportunity. He wants, maybe he's thinking about the story of what happened before with the servant who gave Rebekah the opportunity to prove herself, and say that I need a drink, and if she gets it for the camels. And Jacob's not going to have he's not going to have the self-control to do that. He's on a different kind of a mission, as we'll see. He can't really wait. So he asked the guys, he's like, hey, you guys are ruining my thing here. Why is the stone still on top? It's the middle of the day, so it's not really time to be watering. That would be something they would do when the sun's not at its hottest. And so it's kind of a weird time for them to all be out there. And so the cover is on the well, but it seems like these shepherds that are there, it seems like they're kind of lazy. Because what happens is Jacob shows up and he's like, hey guys, are we going to get some water? And the guys are like, no, we got to wait till later in the day when everyone shows up so they can take it off. And then when all the sheep are gathered, then we'll let them go and water the sheep. And Jacob's like, we can't wait until everybody's here. Let's do it now. And so he doesn't want to wait around. Jacob isn't a guy that likes to wait around for things. He likes to get things done. He likes to keep moving. He likes, he wants to be making money. He wants to be, making things happen. He's got to be making a deal. He's got to be making something happen. So these guys are just like, oh, we're just waiting here. And they're going to wait until the end of the afternoon. Like, just take off the stone from the top of the well and let's make something happen here. But they're waiting. They're waiting for it. They don't want to do it on their own. And so then it goes on. It says in verse 9, it says, now while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. So now Rachel comes onto the scene. Rachel's now at the well with them. And it says, and it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted his voice and wept. And then verse 12, it says, and Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So he ran and told her father. Sorry, she ran and told her father. So as Rachel comes onto the scene now, this is where I want to compare. Notice Jacob compared to Eliezer the servant and how Jacob responds to seeing Rachel, this emotional response. I don't know that it's necessarily a godly response. First of all, in verse 10, it says that when Jacob saw Rachel and the sheep. Did you see that? It says Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother. So Jacob, in this moment, as he gets this opportunity, he sees two things. He sees a pretty girl and sheep. These are two things that he wants, right? He's been sent out to find a wife. Remember the servant, when he went to go find a wife for Isaac, he went in prayer, he went in preparation, he was humble, he was seeking the Lord. He said, God, if this is you, let this happen. He's waiting on the Lord. He's asking God to confirm it. He's patient with God. He's allowing her to show her character. He's doing those things. But notice with Jacob, it's a little bit different. Jacob, first of all, it says what he sees. It's not about what God says. It's not about allowing God to work. It's what he sees. He sees this good-looking girl, and he sees that not only is she good-looking, but she's got a lot of sheep. That's also helpful for Jacob. He's a guy that at this point in time has nothing, right? He was sent out from his parents' house. He doesn't have a dowry for a wife. He doesn't have anything to offer this girl. He's here like totally dependent. Remember Jacob, he's the heel catcher. Jacob is the manipulator. And so he sees, wow, 2 in 1. There's a pretty girl and there's sheep. This could work out for me. This could be a good situation. I might be able to get ahead in life here a little bit. And so Jacob sees opportunity instead of waiting on the Lord's direction. And that's super important because we're going to see some things that take him down a bad road here. Jacob, the first thing that happens with him is he's driven by his sight. He's driven by what he sees. He's driven by opportunity. And so then after he sees the sheep, he sees Rachel. And so look at what he does. It says he rolled the stone from the well's mouth. There were all these shepherds who were there just a few verses back, and they wouldn't roll the stone away because they were waiting for the rest of the shepherds to come and do it all at once. This girl shows up. He sees the girl, and he sees the sheep, and he's like, hey, this is opportunity. Let me show my muscles here. And so he pulls up his shirt, shows off his muscles. Maybe, let me take my jacket off here for a second. And he takes the whole stone off by himself. This is something that all these shepherds would do together. And he's just like, well, this girl just got here, so. And he's asking the guys before, why aren't you guys? And he's like, oh, she's here. All right, you guys step back. Let me take this one. And he takes the thing off so that he can now give the water to the sheep. He's trying to show off for her. Now, in the last story, in chapter 24, we saw that the servant allowed the character to be seen first. Jacob already has an agenda in mind, and so he's trying to manipulate, he's trying to show off to get what he wants. And that's a dangerous thing about dating. When you're just trying to show off to get what you want, right? People can put on a good look when they're dating because, hey, look, see, I'm spiritual, I'm good, I'm praying, I'm doing the right things. Look at me, I'm pretty awesome. Look how strong I am. I could take stones off of the top of wells. And, that's what you're into. And so he's just, I could be good for you. So he gets the water. Now, I want to be careful because it is good that he's laying the foundation of being a servant. The problem is he's actually not a servant. That's the problem, right? So if he was being a servant because that's who he is, that would be great. If he was a servant and he was saying, I want to serve you because I want to bless you, and this is my character, this is not his character. Jacob is no kind of a servant at this point in his life. And so he's trying to impress her by putting on a show for her because he wants something from her. That's a dangerous thing. And so he never gives the opportunity to see character that's built on all the wrong things. He's showing off. He's looking for what he wants and figuring out how he can get it by his own manipulation. And then, verse 11, it says, then he kissed her. So, Jacob, take it easy. Now, that doesn't mean like it doesn't mean he like gave her a big wet one on the lips. Like, maybe it was probably like a cultural kiss. But at the same, it just shows he's very forward. He's like, at this point, he's about to introduce himself to her. That means he's kissing her before he's even introduced who he is. So the point that I want you to see in this is he's moving far faster than what he's able to hear from the Lord in. He hasn't even introduced himself, and he's moving forward in this relationship. He's moving forward into what he wants. He's not waiting on the Lord. He's not listening to the Lord. He's not giving opportunity to the Lord. He sees opportunity. I came here to get married. Well, there's one. And how can I get her? I like her. And he's working on it. That's what's happening here. So Jacob, being Jacob as he continues to be throughout, he's trying to do things his way. So he kisses her, and then it must have been a good kiss because he kissed her, and then he lifted up his voice and he wept. Or it was a bad kiss, I don't know. But whatever it was, there's this huge emotional reaction. And again, I think it's worth pointing out, Jacob is emotionally responding rather than spiritually responding. It's all about what he's feeling. Everything is an emotional reaction. Now, there's nothing wrong with having an emotional reaction as long as you're still able to discern the spiritual, right? Emotions are good. Feelings are good if they're put in the right place. But we have to give space for God. We have to put the Lord first. We have to be listening to the Lord, or we're putting ourselves in a place of danger. And so Jacob is not listening. He's not doing things in the time of the Lord. He's just emotionally driven, doing whatever he wants. And then finally in verse 12, after he's kissed her, after he's wept over her, and he's had these responses, then finally he tells her who he is. He says that he was her father's relative, and so she goes and tells her father. So finally at this point, he's like, oh yeah, you're part of this too. Right? It was all him. It was all him and what he wanted, how he wanted it to go. He was having his reaction. He was having he saw, he reacted, he wept, he kissed. It was all Jacob doing what Jacob wanted. Be careful in a relationship of people that are only all about themselves. That's not a relationship. That's a dangerous kind of a person to be involved with. And so Jacob's going to have to grow up on that stuff. So, and he's going to go through a difficult process of that. So that's what Jacob did compared to the servant who prayed. He asked for God's confirmation. He was patient to see if God would prove himself. He wouldn't allow the flesh to make the decision for him. And then also a very important thing we saw with the servant back in chapter 24 is he allowed Rebekah to choose. Remember, he wouldn't go without having her choose if that was what she wanted. And so in chapter 24, she had a choice. Here in Jacob, he's not even asking her anything. It's all about Jacob. So that's how they meet. That's their love story. That's Jacob's love story. Right? Jacob's the only one in love here. But so she goes and runs to her father, and then verse 13 it says, then it came to pass when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And so he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. Now, remember from this story also back in chapter 24, what does Laban know about this family? What does Laban know about Isaac and Isaac's family that would come directly into his mind as he comes here? They got money. They got money. When Rebecca came home after meeting the servant, she had on all this jewelry that he had given, and he sees the jewelry and he's like, oh, hey, what's happening here? This is interesting. And so Laban is just like Jacob. What can I get? How can this work out for me? What do you have to offer me? So Jacob sees opportunity, but Laban also sees opportunity. And so these two guys, they deserve each other, and they're going to drive each other crazy. And they'll both be just as frustrated by it, by one another. So Laban sees this opportunity, and he thinks this is a chance for me. Laban also probably remembers that God had given promises to Abraham and Isaac, and now those promises will pass on to Jacob, and he thinks, well, if God is blessing this family, I want my daughter to be in that, and he seems to be thinking about how this can work out for him, and so he stays there, it says, for a month. He meets his uncle, and his, they got the same, he says, bone of my bone, he says, is my bone and my flesh, and I think more than you know, that you guys are the same flesh. You guys deserve each other. And so now he's been there for a month. He just gets there and he shows up. And this is interesting also. Jacob stays there for a month. Remember with the servant was like, I need to get back as soon as possible. I have a job. I have a responsibility. I need to get back to my master. If you agree, let's go back today. I need to get you back, right? Because he was on a mission, and he knew that the place of blessing was the promised land that God had promised to Abraham and Isaac. And so he was on his way there. How come Jacob's not in a hurry to go back? He doesn't want to die, right? He's got nowhere to go. He's got no future. So Jacob's here because he needs to be here. He needs a place to stay. He doesn't have anywhere to go. In the last chapter, he was using a stone for his pillow. So I think Laban's house is sounding pretty good right now. He's like, yeah, I'll just hang out here for a while. And he just stays there for a month. He doesn't have anything going on. And so he's going to use Laban as much as he can until it's no longer convenient for him, and then he'll throw him out. Verse 15, it says, then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Now, as soon as you hear that, you know Laban's got something in mind, right? Laban's not doing that to be good to Jacob. Tell me, what should your wages be? Now, Laban had two daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. And now Jacob loved Rachel. So he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. That's the kind of compliment you want, right? I guess it's better than somebody else. So that's the best he could do. And so it says, stay with me. And so Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and this is the part that's romantic. This is the only part that's romantic. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Yeah, that's the nice part. There is one little nice verse in the whole chapter, so everyone can say ah to that. But I think sometimes because of that verse, we misinterpret this whole story. So I don't want to get the story wrong just because of that. So let's think through some things here. So first of all, going back to verse 15, Laban sees that this is opportunity, and he wants to lock Jacob in. He doesn't want to lose him. So he says, let's make a deal so you'll stay here with me, because I don't want to lose you. I want you to be here with me. I want to be able to pay you. And so what are your wages? What do you want? And he probably, after a month, he's seen the way that Jacob's looking at Rachel, and So he knows what he wants, and so he says about the two daughters. He has the two daughters. Leah was the older, which is important in our story. That's going to be an important detail that we want to take note of. And then Rachel was the younger. And it says here in verse 17, this is an interesting thing. I think they're trying to be nice by the way they say it. It says, Leah's eyes were delicate. Delicate is some translations will translate it as weak. Leah's eyes were weak. Different people have said different things about this. Some people say that she had light-colored eyes, and so they were weak, like they were sensitive. And normally in that culture, dark eyes, dark features were more beautiful, and so possibly she had like green eyes, and so that's what he's talking about, delicate eyes. I think, I don't know. Some people say that her eyes were delicate or like they were weak. Like if you look at her, like not her eyes are weak, but when you look at her, you get weak, like in a bad way. Like, ooh, like like a bad reaction. Like, oh man, I don't want to be looking at that. So I mean, I don't. This is what I want to. I mean, you could look here. There's an obvious comparison, right? Verse 17. It says, Leah's eyes were delicate, or literally could be she was weak to look at. But Rachel was beautiful. So you can see the comparison. Rachel was beautiful, and then there's a comparison. So what was Leah? Well, probably whatever he's saying is not beautiful, right? She wasn't something to look at. That's just the point of it, right? I didn't write this, just so you know. Don't blame me. I'm just trying to translate it for you guys to make it understandable. Don't hate the messenger. I'm just reading the Bible. But she's probably not very good to look at. That's the point. And so that's important to note also here in the story. So Jacob loved Rachel, but it seems to be because of, we saw the reaction in just a few verses ago that he was looking at her. He has this emotional response. Maybe he's putting his parents' story on this and saying he's romanticizing the story because of what he had heard about with his parents, and he wants a love story like that. And so, because of what he's heard, he wants a story like this, but he's just romanticizing something that maybe isn't the Lord's will at all. And he loves Rachel, but why does he love Rachel? He loves Rachel because of her beauty. He loves Rachel because she's good to look at, because she's beautiful of form and appearance. And so Jacob doesn't want Leah, he wants Rachel, the younger daughter. And so I think that there's a problem there. He's totally driven by his flesh here, and he's not seeking the Lord. So he loves Rachel. He says, I'll serve you for 7 years for Rachel. Remember, he doesn't have a dowry to pay, right? Normally they would just give the dowry, which would be the security for that girl in case something happened to Jacob. He doesn't have it. He went out with nothing. And so he's here now, and he says, I have nothing to give you. Okay, well, I'll work for you for 7 years. I'll work for you for 7 years to pay the dowry so that I can marry this girl. And, that's, I guess that's a good labor of love, right? 7 years serving. Wow, that's great. And then he does it, and Laban's super excited about it, says, I might as well give her to you instead of somebody else. And then, so he serves for 7 years. And I think, my personal belief is that Rachel wasn't ever the one for him. That's my personal belief, and we'll get into more of that in a second. But I do think that there's a good picture here in verse 20 about how the 7 years, they seem to be only a few days because he had love for her. And I do think there's a good example for us of serving out of obligation compared to serving out of love. When you're serving the Lord out of obligation, it's heavy and it's a burden, and you hate doing it, and you only do it because somebody's twisting your arm or making you feel guilty or putting some kind of yoke of bondage on you. Look at Galatians chapter 5. In Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, it says, "For you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use your liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." This is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. I go back to this verse all the time because I think it's such a good picture of what Christian service should look like, right? We have a danger in Christianity to be legalistic. And that's a dangerous thing to fall into. When we only serve out of compulsion because there's this rule-based relationship that I have with God that I have to produce. That's not healthy. But on the other side, if we're standing on our freedom and I don't have to do anything and you can't put anything over me and you can't tell me what to do, well, that's fine, but there should be a love that causes you to want to serve, right? Out of love, we should want to serve one another. And so this is the perfect balance of I'm not serving under compulsion, under legalism, under some religious manipulation, but because I love, I want to serve. And that's how we should serve people. In Colossians chapter 3, Colossians 3, verse 22, it says this. It says, "Bondservants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive your reward of the inheritance, where you serve the Lord Christ." The service has to be for the Lord and not as men pleasers. And of sincerity of heart, fearing God, but not for man. Right? Not so that we can impress people, but so that we can do it as a service unto the Lord. So even though I think Jacob in our story is getting it wrong, I think there is a good example of when you serve out of love, it changes everything. It changes everything. And you can serve and you can give. And Paul talks about how he's being poured out like a drink offering. He's being poured out like a drink offering because he desires to give and to serve. He loves the Lord so much, he can't stop giving of himself. He just thinks, I got to give more. I got to overflow. I want to give more to the Lord. How can I give myself to the Lord and to people? It's not out of compulsion. It's not out of legalism. It's not so that I can be right with God. It's because God has given me everything and I want to serve him out of love. And then it's not a weight. It shouldn't be a yoke of bondage, but it should be a labor of love. And so I think that is a great example, even though the rest of it is not. So let's go back to our story, Genesis 29. And we'll continue here, verse 21. It says, "Then Jacob said to Laban, 'Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in to her.' And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob, and he went in to her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid." And so we'll stop there. So Jacob does his 7 years, seems as just a few days, finishes the 7 years, says, okay, time's up, I want my wife, and they make a feast. Now, at this feast that they have, I would imagine there's probably some drinking going on. So as Jacob is in the tent, I mean, they don't have a light to turn on, and it'll be dark in there, and had a little too much to drink at the feast, and he thinks he married somebody, and then morning comes, and not the right one. And so he gave 7 years of his life to marry this one. He had this expectation of who he was marrying, and then he wakes up the next day, and that's not the person I married. What is this? This isn't how it was supposed to be. I had a different expectation in mind. my expectation for marriage was this, but I woke up on my wedding day and this looks a little bit different than I expected it to be. And sometimes that can be the experience of people because of, what we talked about before with the manipulation and the proving yourself and showing off and all those things. And then you get married and, this is the person I'm married to? This isn't what I expected it to be. Verse 25, it says, "So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah, and he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me?" This is super interesting. Jacob, it would have been funny if Leah had some goat skin on her arms and, like this is exactly, just a couple chapters ago, he was exactly Laban. He did the exact same thing in a dark room where his dad couldn't see. He tricked his dad by putting the younger instead of the older, where now it just switched right back on him. In this dark room, now everything's switched, and the older was placed instead of the younger, and he's complaining about this, but he's complaining about the exact thing that he had done. It's funny how our sin looks so much worse than somebody else. When you see somebody else doing the sin that you have a problem with, man, you can point that out right away, right? How could they dare to do that thing that I do every day? Right? Like, this is who you are. This is what you've always done. In Galatians 6:7, it talks about how we reap what we sow. This is what you are planting this seed. This is what's going to come back to you. You gotta be careful the way that you're living. He could see it clearly when someone does it to him, and so he says, "What are you doing? Why have you deceived me?" Now look at Laban's response. I think this is probably a dig on Jacob. It says, Laban said in verse 26, it must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. What just happened with Jacob? He's the younger, and he took the place of the firstborn. So Laban's saying to Jacob, maybe in your country you can do this. Maybe in your culture you can do this, but guess what? We respect the laws of our culture. Where we come from, we don't do that kind of thing. You know what you did with your brother? We don't do that around here. Like, oh man. Okay. So he's just directly telling Jacob, like, hey, that's not acceptable around here. You better watch yourself. I know what you're trying to do. I know who you are. And so he's saying, hey, you're going to, you want to be a deceiver? You want to try to do things? Well, I can be a deceiver too. And around here, we're going to do things my way. And so he says, we're going to give the older first. We're not going to respect the younger above the older. That's not how we do things. And that's, you might have got away with it, but we're not doing it here. And so then verse 27, it says, fulfill her week, which means 7 years. Week sounds so nice, right? And we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years. So what is Laban wanting to get out of this whole thing? 7 more years of free labor. 7 more years of blessing. 7 more years of God's favor. 7 more years of having Jacob doing all his work for him. He just wants the free labor. He just wants the blessing from God. It's not that he cares about Leah. It's not that he cares about culture. It's not that he cares about doing things the right way. It's that he wants another free 7 years. And so for him, you could tell he already had this plan all in his mind. Oh, we can solve this problem. We got a problem. That's fine. We'll solve it. 7 more years. Simple little problem. 7 more years and it's done. And so Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, and so he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife also. So now he took his second wife. And it says in verse 29, and Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. And then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban still another 7 years. So he does it 7 years. He marries Rachel, and now we have this problem. What was the problem that we had in Isaac's family? What was the problem with Jacob and Esau? It was a problem of giving preference to one over another, right? We saw that culture in their house, and that caused so many problems. And now Jacob is doing things his own way, did God tell him to go and marry 2 wives? No. That was never the plan of God. That was never God's heart for him. He went beyond what God had told him. He marries a second wife, which was never told to him to do. And now, because he loves Rachel more, now there's this same problem in the home that happened in his home, and he's reproducing the same kind of sin. Preferences, one above the other, and we're going to see throughout. We're going to see competition in the wives, and then we're going to see the servants brought into it, and then we're going to see it in the kids, and that's why Joseph is going to be sold as a slave, right? It just continues. It doesn't get better. It's just a downward spiral because this is not God's plan. They're acting in the flesh. Jacob never sought the Lord at the beginning. He never looked for what God had for him, and he's just pushing things through on his own. This is what I want. This is how I want to do it. It didn't work out my way with Leah, so I'll just marry the next one. I'll marry another one then. If Leah doesn't make me happy, then I'll just marry another wife. Maybe she'll make me happy. And he's not listening to what God has, but he's doing things in his own flesh, and it's all a lie. The grass is always greener on the other side, right? It looks, that will solve my problems. If I just marry her, then I'll be happy. If I could just have this, then I'll be happy. Look at, Rachel, yeah, that's the one I want. 7 more, okay, I'll work, whatever I have to do, because if I can just get to that, that'll be the place where I'm happy. Guess what? He's not happy. He's not happy because now he's created all kinds of unneeded problems in his home, and there's going to be competition and fighting and all kinds of issues because he's not listening to the direction of the Lord. He's doing things his own way. And so he just marries Rachel anyways. I think the correct answer here for Jacob, I think that if we stop and think about it, what God did with Jacob is the same thing as what God did with Leah, right? Isaac had a plan to go against what God had. And Isaac had a plan to bless Esau even though Jacob was the one who should have had the blessing, right? But God didn't allow it to happen, and he blessed Jacob, right? And then now Jacob comes and he wants to marry Rachel. His desire is to marry Rachel. He should have learned from his dad that maybe sometimes I want things that are against God's will. Maybe sometimes that desire in my heart actually comes from my flesh and it goes against what God actually wants for me. And so then God, by his providence, allows Leah to be the one that marries him. And instead of being like his dad Isaac, when Isaac saw that, Isaac said, oh man, I made a mistake. I should have blessed Jacob the whole time. I'm going to bless Jacob. And he receives the blessing because he was the one that God had planned. Jacob should have realized, oh man, I made a mistake by desiring Rachel. God gave me Leah. I should love Leah. That should have been the answer. That should have been what he responded. Because God gave him Leah, he better love Leah. If he married Leah, God allowed him to marry Leah. God put Leah there. That's the one that God is going to bless. And we can see that proved through Scripture. In our culture, I think we get this story wrong because we like the love story of Jacob saw love at first sight, right? Love at first sight. And he worked 7 years. It was as if a couple of days, right? And we love that story. I think that's the wrong story. I think Jacob sees Rachel and he's totally in his flesh, and he wants his parents' love story, and he sees how she looks. He's looking at the outward instead of the inward. He's not listening to the Lord. He marries the one that God gave him, and he thinks, oh, I could have done better than this. And instead of living in what God gave him, he's looking outside of his marriage to think about someone else that could satisfy him. He's not satisfied in his marriage. He's looking outside of his marriage. That's the wrong application. That's not what he should do. And he's looking for this other person that he thinks is going to satisfy. Now, if we look going forward in history, we're going to see that the sons of Aaron, the Levites, they come from Leah's line. If we see the sons of Judah, where David and then Jesus come, they come from Leah's line. And if we see the one wife, or only one of the wives, is married in the cave of Machpelah together with the other Abraham and Isaac and their wives, the only one of the wives that's married, that's buried with him, is Leah. She's in the cave of Machpelah with him. So the one that God had given him, the one that God blessed him with, the one that would fulfill the promises was Leah. But because Jacob is looking outside of his marriage, he's adding all kinds of problems that don't need to be there. He's not allowing what God provided for him to be enough. He's looking for his own satisfaction above and beyond what God had promised to him, what God had given to him. The person that God gives you, that's the person you need to love. When you're married, you're married. And you need to love that person you're married to. You don't need to look outside of marriage because that's the person you have. And there's no reason to think outside of that. Why is he looking for a Rachel when he already has a Leah? He's married. But he's looking outside of it. He's looking beyond what God wanted to do in his life. So I think that there's a powerful exhortation on marriage in this story that reminds us that marriage isn't about the feeling and the emotion. Love is a choice. Love is a decision. Love is faithfulness. It's being committed to that person for the long haul. And so, I think Jacob made a huge mistake here by going beyond what God had given him. Now going on verse 31, it says, when the Lord saw Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So the Lord sees Leah in her struggle. He still takes care of her as she's not seen, she's not loved, she's not cared for. What I love about this story, Leah didn't do anything wrong. She doesn't deserve to be in this situation. She's stuck in this thing where it's not her fault at all. She just got put in this situation, and here she is, unloved in this difficult relationship. What is she supposed to do? What I love about this story is that God sees her. God sees her in that. And God knows what she's going through, and God's with her in her struggle. And it says in verse 32, so Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now, therefore, my husband will love me. This is really sad to see Leah throughout this process. Just see her struggle as she thinks, well, now I have a son. Now he's going to love me. Now he's going to see me. Now this will change everything. But the problem, Leah thinks that the problem is the kids, or thinks that the problem is some situation, some circumstance that she's in. The problem isn't the situation. It's not what they're living through. The problem is Jacob's heart. That's what needs to be changed. What needs to be changed is Jacob's heart. And so she's looking for these things that are going to solve the problem, but none of these things are going to solve the problem. And so going on verse 33, verse 33, it says, then she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, and he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. And so Simeon means heard. And so she has a second son. God sees her. She recognizes that God sees her. She recognizes that in this God sees me. And so she has the second son, and she's heard. She's heard not by her husband, but she's heard by God. God sees her. God hears her, and God knows her. And then verse 34, it says, she conceived again and bore a son, and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name shall be Levi. And Levi means attached. She thinks, now things are going to change. He's going to be attached to me. Unfortunately, the problem is in Jacob's heart, so having 3 kids isn't going to help the problem. So she now has 3 kids, hoping this is going to solve it, and still no. Verse 35, and she conceived again and bore a son, and said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and then she stopped bearing. Now we're going to get into some more things. I'm not going to get into it tonight, but the list of kids keeps on going after this. And we're kind of stopping in the middle, but I just want to give this as our last thought. She she had these kids looking for these things to fix everything. If I have this kid, this is going to fix all the problems. It's kind of the same thing of with Jacob with having, maybe if I have this other wife, then I'll be happy. Those things aren't going to satisfy you. The kids aren't going to be the satisfaction you're looking for. The spouse isn't going to be the satisfaction you're looking for. All those things, those don't solve the problems. There's one person that can solve the problem. And finally, after the fourth kid, she realizes, now I will praise the Lord. She realizes there's one person. It's God. He's the one who sees. He's the one I need to find my identity in. I need to find my purpose, my contentment, because Jacob isn't going to fulfill her. And she's not going to fulfill Jacob. They need God. If they don't have God in the relationship, it's not going to be a happy marriage. It's not going to be a good relationship. It's not going to be healthy. And so instead of looking to Jacob for the first three kids, you see her struggling through this. Well, this will be the answer. This will be the answer. This will be the answer. And it's never the answer. And finally, with the fourth one, she realizes, I'm going to praise the Lord. I'm not going to look to Jacob. What is Jacob going to do? Like, he came into this story, he was broken, homeless, right? Like, what is he going to do for me? You need God. You need the Lord. And so she realizes, I'm going to praise the Lord. And that's when things start changing in her heart of she can be content in the Lord and not because of what he can do for her or what that relationship is going to fulfill. Now, don't get me wrong, because marriage is great. Marriage can be the greatest blessing, but marriage will have highs and lows. You'll have good seasons and bad seasons. It will be, I'm so thankful for the gift of marriage. It's awesome, but if you look for your satisfaction, for your fulfillment in that relationship, you'll never be completely fulfilled. We need the Lord. And together with the Lord, man, it can be a great and a fulfilling relationship. It's awesome. Marriage is great. As long as our fulfillment is in the Lord first, then everything can be in the right place. So I think a lot of good practical encouragements from this chapter for us in just relationships in general. We need to be satisfied with what the Lord's giving us. We need to be patient for what the Lord's giving in his timing and not trying to do it in our flesh and what we want in this moment, because we can cause a lot of consequences when we do that, right? We want to do it the Lord's way in his time. So may we have patience with all the timing and the work of the Lord to happen. Lord, thank you for this time in your word. Thank you for the things that you're teaching us. Thank you for the fulfillment and the satisfaction that we find in you that is far beyond anything that marriage or children can give us. Even though marriage and having kids is a great blessing and it's such a gift, those things are never going to fulfill us completely, because we need you. We need you to be truly fulfilled. So help us to be content in what you're doing today. Help us not to look outside what you're doing and just living in envy over what other people have. Or maybe we be satisfied with what you've given us, whatever that looks like today. And maybe we make the most of it. In Jesus' name.